press the button, but it's not happening. Oh, there we go. Hello and welcome to the Hibs Observer afternoon briefing, actually. Nearly said morning there, with myself, Liam Bryce, joined by Matty Fairnie from the Long Bangers podcast, sponsored today, as always, by MPH Group and Weissman Boilers. Matty, thanks for joining us again. It's been a while since we've had you on. I looked back, it was the 25th of April was the last time you were with us, and that day we were talking about whether Nick Montgomery had 5 games to save his job. So I think it's fair to say things have changed a wee bit since then, haven't they?
Yeah, quite a lot happened in the meantime. Did we get it right? Can you remember?
I don't know. Maybe somebody can tell us in the comments. That all feels like a long time ago now, because there's kind of obviously, as you say, a lot has happened since then, and a lot has happened this week alone. Today we're going to dig into what's kind of been the big story of the week. Bill Foley speaking out on Hibs and what he feels Hibs are not doing at the moment, putting David Gray in the spotlight. Had to answer questions on that last night after the friendly defeat to Watford. And then we'll also take a look, because we are still in the transfer window, we'll be taking a look at what's happening there. What does Matty feel that Hibs still needs? Priority areas, everything that goes along with that. But we'll start, Matty, with kind of the big story of the week and get your sort of take on it. I suppose there's maybe two kind of sides to this, two facets, maybe, in terms of, Bill Foley coming out and saying that he feels that Hibs haven't been listening to his Black Knight group on important issues. And then obviously the information coming out afterwards that, they perhaps didn't want David Gray for the role. They had their own preferred candidates, Mccardy, as well. So I suppose the kind of the two sides of it are, the relationship with Black Knight and Hibs. What does that mean for this going forward? Is it going to be a bit trickier than perhaps we kind of initially anticipated? And then the second half of that is, as a lot of people have said, it does kind of put David Gray in a wee bit of a position. I'm not convinced that he's, speaking to him and listening to him last night, I'm not convinced he's been too bothered by all this. He seems like the kind of guy that is able to kind of brush these things off and kind of focus on the task at hand. But we'll get to that. So, I mean, what's your kind of take on kind of the whole overarching situation at the moment? What do you make of
it? So I think there's a school of thought that it's not that big a deal, and it was a throwaway line from Bill Foley, and I'm not sure I subscribe to that one. I think it speaks to bigger problems, and the issue I have with it is there's a sort of real indication there that there's a breakdown in what people thought this relationship was all about, or what was going to happen. And I can't quite get my head around how we've got to that point, because it was only 4 or 5 months since the investment was agreed. And you would have to think, it's a bit of an assumption, right? But I think it's a reasonable one, that in the lead up to both parties sort of saying this is something that we want to do, they'll have had long and detailed discussions about what it looks like, what each party wants to get from it. And it's been clear, actually, if you listen to the communication from Ben Kensell at the time, he was really clear about Hibs retaining control, being able to tap into the benefits of the group, having access to best practice, player movement. We'd be able to get players that were otherwise out of our reach. But the biggest sort of benefit was we would still be Hibs and we would still be making decisions independently. And if you listen to Bill Foley from the time, he talked about being able to leverage the strength of the group, move players within it, have a consistency of approach. I think he said this week in another interview when he was talking about Bournemouth that if all the clubs in the group work independently, then the model fails, because you basically don't have a group then, you just have a collection of assets. But he also was very keen to iterate that he was just there to support, and Ian Gordon ultimately retained, or Ian and Kit Gordon ultimately retained final decision making. So to get to the point where we are today, where Foley's kind of come out and say, well, they're not listening to us, something's broken down there. And I just don't know how that can how that can happen. And if you look at the particular decisions, my guess is, and it is just a guess, right? But I think there must have been a point where you sort of map out how do we get Hibs from where we are today at the point of investment to being fully integrated in the group and enjoying the benefits, but also taking the responsibility for it, because that is a compromise, isn't it? Like you can't get all the, get the players without having to give up something.
Yeah.
And so if you agree all those steps, one of those steps you would think at some point is having key staff that align with the group, which would be your performance director and potentially your head coach. And if at the first opportunity Hibs have sort of gone, well, we want Malcolm Mackay because he's steeped in Scottish football. We want David Gray because nobody has a better knowledge of the insides of the club. And that leaves Foley scratching his head. So that's not really kind of what I was expecting to happen based on what was discussed. And I think that's where it's gone wrong. But I mean, Hibs are within the rights to sort of look after themselves first. And I think as a support, we would all want to see that. Like we want Hibs first, group second, if at all. Like really Hibs fans aren't bothered about the group. We want Hibs to succeed. But I just don't get how you sign up for an investment in a package like that and say, yeah, we're going to be part of the group, to then turn around and say, well, we kind of changed our mind on that now 4 months later.
Yeah, it is. It was a strange one, and I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head with saying that when you do sign up to this thing, there's going to be levels of compromise that are needed, and I think, but that can also, I suppose, at points lead you into problems if there's different ideas as to where things have been going. Because I think it was quite clear, and I'm not saying it was a kind of overwhelming opinion, but it certainly seems to have been an opinion, at levels of the club, that after the Nick Montgomery tenure, after appointments like Sir Sean Maloney, Lee Johnson, that was it time for Hibs to get back to basics almost, and bring in guys who had a deep knowledge of Scottish football, had a deep knowledge of the club, and I think to then try and go down that route. But I think when you're maybe bringing in the Black Knights, Bill Foley, that is not that was never going to be their vision for the club, really, was it? That because I know we do like to think of Scottish football as this big outlier in terms of if you don't get Scottish football, then you don't get it kind of thing. That it's a kind of a law unto itself, and I think there is, in some ways, some truth to that. In terms of the way that the league operates, fan bases, that they just kind of hold the football culture and what it takes to succeed in Scotland. But I suppose, with the benefit of 2020 hindsight, maybe that was always going to be an issue at some point. So I suppose it's. I mean, certainly the information we got of was that there was disagreement here, and it was the information that came out in kind of various stories, but there was kind of although there was disagreement, there was no fracture, as it were. But does it really concern you long term, or do you think it's maybe just one of these things that's they've hit an early bump in the road? There was always maybe going to be teething issues in this relationship, and it's something that they can then, moving forward, almost iron out and find the best way of working together?
You would like to think it can be ironed out. I mean, really, you're looking at grown-ups involved and successful grown-ups at that. So you would think they could sit down, and if there is a lingering issue there about the disagreement, then just talk it through and work out a way forward. Because there must still be a way to make it work. If with Malcolm Mackay and David Gray. I don't know if some of the concern comes from the fact that when we never made top six, the club came out and said, well, we're doing this review in conjunction with the Black Knights. And I don't think it's a huge leap to think that part of that review was, well, here's what we've seen and here's what our recommendations are. And the recommendations are these people for these roles. And if that recommendation is then dismissed, you kind of go, well, what was the point in asking us for our help if you're going to carry on to do your own thing? Anyway, and I think it's also fair to say that the track record of decision making and appointing people at Hibs has not been terrific over the last few years. I mean, we've seen like Steve Keane come and go in as an academy director. Brian McDermott came in for a year-long stint as director of football and then didn't be replaced by Malcolm Mackay. And there was a bit of noise even at the time of Malcolm Mackay's appointment that it was jobs for the boys kind of things, chairman's power when he's come right in, what was the recruitment process, etc. And I think that those concerns were sort of quietened a lot when you heard Malcolm Mccardy talk about it. And actually, if you hear him speak about the role, he absolutely sounds like the right guy for it. But I think when you sort of try to piece together how we've got to this point, there will be red flags for I think both parties on the group, and I think from Black Knight's side, definitely we're here because you needed help. Sort of position that they came in from, to then not have the help taken on board, it probably leaves them scratching their heads just to think like, well, what are you expecting to happen next? What's going to be different? Yeah, I'd like to think it could be moved forward. I mean, we're only 4 months in. Like, I don't know how much folk were expecting to see change within 4 or 5 months. I guess we'll see whether or not we sort of sign the quality players that we're talking about when they were pitching the investment in the next few weeks, and that might give us an indication as to how comfortable Bill Foley is in sending players to us.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, if you look across at Lorient as well, there's obviously been kind of, if you could call it, I know. I mean, if you're a Lorient fan, you wouldn't want to hear me calling them getting relegated, teething issues. But like, it's like there's obviously, when parties come together like this, there probably is going to be a level of, a level of transition almost, and just obviously the hope for Hibs then is that everybody can get on the same page. As I said, moving towards, there's no like kind of fractures at the highest levels, but although there has been, as we've seen in kind of various reports this week, of disagreement. But I mean, I suppose the other side of this, as I spoke about at the start, was David Gray, because then it's then come out publicly that perhaps he wasn't the Black Knights' choice to take on this role, and then it's kind of, I suppose you could say it puts him in a bit of a position, because then he inevitably he's the guy who speaks after games. He's going to have to answer the questions on it. I suppose. I mean, how do you feel about it from that aspect? Because it does seem a bit unfair on him. And I said, well, that seems to be the prevailing opinion of kind of fans from what I've seen.
Yeah, I think unfair is probably the best word for it. And I'm not sure whether that information came out from Hibs' end or from Foley's end, but it immediately puts the spotlight on it. And I know, from my own experience, one of the sort of golden rules is if you're in a position of charge and you're making a collective decision, whatever that decision is, everybody gets behind it. When you thrash it out in the room, and if you disagree during that conversation, when you get to the point where the decision's made, you show a united front on the back of it. So it should never have come out that David Gray and Malcolm Mccardy were not the unanimous picks for the role. And I think it is really unfair on Gray, because almost no matter what happens now, like as soon as, and we will hit a bad run of form, it's inevitable, because the size of club that Hibs are, and history tells us we'll always have a bad run of form. It's an easy stick to kind of throw at the club, and particularly for Ben Kensel and Ian Gordon for being the ultimate decision makers. Is if it goes badly wrong, they come under fire for hiring David Gray. But I think it undermines him. That said, I thought he handled the question brilliantly last night for the interviews I've seen and read from him. I thought he batted it off really well and probably gave it all the focus it really merited, which was like a sort of, I'm just here to concentrate on the football. That's more or less. If he wins games, nobody's going to come back to it in a month or 2 months.
Yeah.
So I think the fans are all behind him. Every Hibs fan's rooting for David Gray. Let's face it. So I don't think he loses any face with the support, but it's just something else that he could have done without, especially after the result last weekend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's exactly what he said. Was it? I've had enough on my plate, basically, since Saturday. And I think you're right. I think I kind of tweeted last night that I think he gave the correct answer to it. He's sort of not fueled it in any way, but he's also, and that wee reminder that the club here, they thought I was the man for the job. I believe I'm the man for the job. I've got full faith in my ability to do it. I don't profess to know the inner workings of David Gray's mind, but he didn't come across as a guy who'd been too bothered by it, too worked up. I think it's just, I think kind of modern football managers, that it's probably a golden rule that, you can't really afford to focus on things that you can't control, because they have so much on their plate. So for him to get worked up about something like that, I mean, I understand that, it's unfair, and I've seen people saying, I kind of feel sorry for him being put in that position. But I mean, and I kind of agree with that viewpoint. I understand that point of view, but at the same time, David Gray doesn't strike me as the type of guy who would want anybody to feel sorry for him.
Yeah.
He looks as if he's just kind of fully focused on getting on with the job. I mean, whether it becomes, as you say, an issue down the line, if it then, as you say, becomes a stick to beat people with, if it's things that it's something people are going to come back to, if results go, downhill from here on, I mean, then it might come into his head, well, is this going to affect me going forward? But I think as of now, it's, I kind of fully believe him. I know it sounds like the very predictable thing for a manager to say, but you do fully believe him when he just says, like, I'm just concentrating on the job that I've got to do, because I'd imagine that's taken up 24/7 at the moment. And so I mean it's one of those ones. I think he's, as you say, he's dealt with it pretty perfectly, I would think.
Yeah, I think the thing to remember with these things is, so the news broke on Monday afternoon. I think it's when the comment came out. By Monday evening, we knew what the decision was, and then people idiots like me, we spend a great amount of time sort of hand wringing about it and trying to thrash out what it means and posting on forums, and we talk about it almost 24/7. But if you're David Gray, he's probably had a 2-minute chat with Ben Kensel. He'll have picked up the phone and said, "David, this stuff's come out. Don't worry about it. You got to feel back and everybody here. This is the situation." And he'll go, "No bother." And then they get on with their day and don't think about it, don't think twice about it until he gets a microphone thrust under his nose and say, "What did you think about this?" And he's, like I say, he sort of just batted the question away. So I think we make more of these things than probably the reality is, and we will get a little bit carried away. And I think the truth is, and for the folk who are living it, they probably go, I could have done without that, but they move on very quickly and focus on stuff that's actually important.
Exactly. I think it's easy to forget that we live in a completely different world to these guys,
Yeah.
and the Foley stuff. It was brilliant. From a media perspective, it was first come out on the BBC and stuff like that. It looks like it's a brilliant headline. It's eye catching. It's this and that. But I think you're right in saying, like, it's different for the folk who are actually involved, and I'd be surprised if he had really genuinely spent too much. Dispensed too much energy on it. I think what he will be probably putting a lot more focus on is strengthening his team. I know he's part of that process. The recruitment team there. You get Malcolm Mccardy, but it's all linked together. He'll be involved in that. David Gray. I mean, what do you make of where? I mean, especially after kind of last night, where you got to look at two very different teams, and it kind of. There's those kind of games and those approaches to these friendlies always serve up a kind of clear picture, I feel, of where a squad is at, because then you're getting first half essentially pretty close to what you'd think David injuries permitting to other guys. Obviously Chris Cadden, Ellie Yuan, the likes not available, Joe Bursick out just now. Probably as close to his strongest 11 as he could put on the park in that first half. And in the second half, you've got the guys who are either, it was a kind of mix of guys who are academy, guys who have been on the fringes, a few guys who are essentially maybe probably deemed surplus to requirements under previous managers. So then you get them, they come in, they get a chance to impress. So, I mean, after last night, where do you feel the squad is at, and what do you think it? Obviously, striker's the main one. Everybody knows that, but just kind of overall picture, how far away do you think it is?
I think if we could get maybe another 4 in, which is maybe optimistic, but definitely I think we need 2 at the top end of the pitch. I think the pressure on Venti to get goals is too much based on what we've seen from him so far. Obviously, he's had a hat trick in the League Cup so far, but I still don't think we can rely on him to be like a 15 to 20 goal a season striker. So we need some competition or to replace him. Mccardy, I don't know what the long-term plans are for him. David Gray talked about him after the game about coming back in. He obviously got another goal. That's 2 in the pre-season and the League Cup campaign that he's got now. So he might take a bit of pressure off and finding 2. We might only need 1 there. We saw on Saturday at Kelty that we're short at left back, so Abita was rested, and we played Megwa, who's a right back, at left back, because we didn't really have anybody else to come in there. And then I still think we're short in midfield, so again on more so on Saturday than last night. I actually thought Levitt and Amos did quite well last night when they came on, but I thought they really struggled as a pairing on Saturday on the sort of smaller pitch at Kelty. So I think we still need a few first team starters, players that are not there as squad members but are going to replace the guys that we've got just now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's that way, but I think I don't think the starting 11 in some areas is too far away. I mean, David Gray, he said last night, I don't think with that, a couple of additions will not be far away. I mean, what he quite exactly means by a couple, do you know what I mean? It's that way, like, when somebody says they're going for a couple of pints, does that mean 2 pints? Does that mean like you don't know exactly what is that? So he's kind of. I mean, I'd imagine he's obviously we know he wants a striker. I'd think he wants another left back, and that's something Hibs could go back to in the later in the window, I believe. But kind of priority just now is getting somebody in up top. I agree with you. Maybe a different profile in midfield. Maybe a more creative presence. I mean, sometimes I do wonder what perhaps the likes of Dylan Levitt could do further up the park. Obviously, we've seen him played as a number 6, but does he maybe have the kind of intensity in his game to play higher up where sometimes that's the guy who's almost initiating the defending from the front, but the likes of Levitt, he's a danger in front of goal. You get him anywhere in that kind of 20 to 25 yard space, then chances are he's going to work the goalkeeper. But I do think maybe a creative presence up there. The winger kind of situation perhaps does depend on what's going to happen with Welly Yuan. We know there is interest in him, but doesn't seem to have moved on too much certainly since we asked Malky Mackay about it last month. Obviously, he's picked up an injury just now. We've seen him walking about Easter Road in a leg brace last night. David Gray said that he's maybe a couple of weeks away. I think he was kind of stressing that it's not too much of a concern, but they don't want to take any chances of him. So I think you see the leg brace sometimes and it looks, that looks bad, but there could be a precautionary element to that. But I think maybe is the kind of depth of the squad beyond the starting 11 perhaps something it's going to take several windows to fix. I think, again, harking back to what Malky Mackay said when he first came in, that kind of clearing the squad out is going to be a long-term process because there's not a lot of guys out of contract this summer, but there are plenty next summer. So I get, would it can I surprise you if Hibs did get to the end of the window and there probably are still going to be issues to address moving forward? It's probably going to be a kind of longer-term thing.
Yeah, I think that might well be the case. I mean, certainly if you listen to, like, if pay attention to what Malky was saying and take him at his word, then there's only so much budget that Hibs have got, and despite the extra money going in, we talked about this like in a wee bit length on the podcast. If you go back to the AGM, Hibs had posted accounts that had our wages to turnover at 80-odd%, which is way higher than they recommend. And Ben Kensel sort of reassured everybody, so look, we've just had a record year at turnover, and we've got that percentage back down to 60-65%, whatever it was, which is, I think, close to the recommended for football clubs. I think turnover's gone down since then, but the budget hasn't, the wage spend hasn't. So if you still want to manage a wages to turnover at around 60%, then you're going to have to cut the squad before you bring people in. It's just, simple.
Yeah.
Is that arithmetic or mathematics? I don't know. Simple arithmetic. So I don't know. I'd like to see if we could get more for the players that we can't shift, rather than just sort of taking for granted that they're not going to play and they're just going to take a wage and sit somewhere. If we could get these players improved and get them into the team and contributing, then it's probably not such a bad thing. I just don't think that's especially likely. Based on what we've got. Yeah, I think we've got a lot of squad fillers at the moment that I don't see contributing too much over the season.
Yeah. So what do you think? Do you think potentially Harry Mccardy could be someone who comes in and contributes? Because, I mean, he looked sharp last night. He looked fairly sharp against Edinburgh City. I mean, you always get that from him. He's kind of, he is a live wire. He's kind of full throttle at all times. And he seems to, I mean, for understandable reasons, given what he's been through, but there seems to be, essentially, since I've started, I've come into this role and covering Hibs, that you can really tell there seems to be a lot of goodwill and a lot of willingness among the Hibs support for McCurdy to do well, isn't there? I mean, you could see even last night the reaction to him getting his first goal at Easter Road. Even though it was still a friendly, there is a kind of a real willingness for him to succeed still, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely. I actually thought he was our most dangerous player against Kelty. He only played the first half. He managed to hit the bar and got another couple of shots away, and probably looked the most likely of anybody to score. And again, last night, I thought he equipped himself well. He scored a cracking goal against Edinburgh City earlier. Everybody is desperate for him to do well. I don't know whether it's the haircut or the shorts rolled, the socks rolled down to the ankles and the shirt untucked. And I think Hibs fans like a wee bit of Maverick or a Raj in the team, and he seems to sort of fit that bill. And if he kind of hit a wee run and started scoring, I don't think there'd be many folk happier than the Hibs support about it.
Mm-hmm. Aye, well, you might see him get more time at the weekend. I mean, possibly in line for, depending where he's at fitness-wise, could get a start against Peterhead. We'll probably find out more from David Gray at his press conference tomorrow. I mean, so going into that game at the weekend, are you kind of confident Hibs will get the job done after what happened last week?
Yeah, I think so. I think last week was a blip, and as embarrassing and awful as the score was, Hibs should have won the game comfortably. Like, if you look at the chances that we missed, for all the hand wringing, if you take like an objective look at it, the Hibs should have won the game fairly comfortably. Bigger pitch at Easter Road, we saw against Queen's Park, who are a decent sort of team at that level. I mean, we tore them apart. We did the same against Elgin. So I would expect us to get back to that sort of performance and, famous last words and touch wood, etc. But I don't anticipate too many problems with it.
Yeah, aye. I mean, you would fancy Hibs to get the job done, especially if, with a full strength or close enough to full strength team on the pitch. But I suppose we shall see at the weekend. As I alluded to there, we'll be at the press conference tomorrow to speak to David Gray and a member of the squad. We'll probably get a few injury updates from there. Also, updates on what's happening in the transfer market. Are Hibs any closer to adding to their squad? And then after that, we'll be back at Easter Road on Saturday. So maybe see a few of you there. Matty, thanks for joining us. I promise it will not be another 3 months before we get you on again.
Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Folks, as always, thank you for joining us. If you could hit the subscribe button to help us grow our YouTube channel, and then maybe even if you like what we do, take a look at the ticker at the bottom of the screen, hibsobserver.co.uk/subscribe. £4 for 4 months for access to all our content heading into the start of the season, covering Hibs from all angles, interviews, features, tactical analysis, and videos like this one. So, get involved if you can. We really do appreciate it. Thank you very much again, and we'll speak to you very soon.